Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our second CJCM webinar on climate justice perspectives to fix the Eskom crisis. From the Eskom crisis to community and socially owned renewable energy systems, that is the theme of today's webinar. And today we're joined by three panelists. The first is Trevor Ngwane. Trevor is a scholar activist from the anti-apartheid days. He is the director for the Center for Sociological Research and Practice and a member of Kopanang Africa Against Xenophobia, United Front, and the Socialist Group. He's the author of Amakomiti, Grassroots, Democracy in South African Shack Settlements. Second, we're joined by Sunny Morgan, climate justice activist and energy expert. And then last but not least, we're joined by Janet Cherry, Professor of Development Studies at Nelson Mandela University and the member of the Amandla Collective, heading the Transition Township Project. So today we have three speakers. Each of them will be speaking for 15 minutes, and then we'll open up to the floor for a round of questions. For those who've just joined us now, this webinar is being recorded, so we will share it with everyone who is in attendance today and everyone who is unable to make it, and it will also be uploaded to YouTube. So we'll begin with our first speaker, Trevor Ngwane. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks to the comrades, the activists who are always pushing this train, which is a very important train, in my opinion. So what I want to speak about is what I can call the politics involved, the power relations, the struggles which we have to go through in the fight for the move to renewables. I don't have any answers. It's just to underline what needs to be done and to try and avoid maybe not seeing some of the real issue which needs to be addressed. So the first thing is, it is imperative, it's very important that we move from carbon-heavy technologies and energy generation to carbon-neutral technology. So carbon-heavy being the burning of coal when we produce electricity, running our factories, using machines which use energy from dirty coal, etc. So I'm going to ask the question, what is necessary? What must be done? And also look at what are the obstacles. So I think it's important to say that in addressing these questions, it is important to combine the global and the local perspective. So one needs to understand what is happening in South Africa, where we live, and then also in the bigger world. So we have to see the link between these two spheres, as it were, and the dynamics which link them. So South Africa, to start at home, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not projecting properly, but my slides are not that important, actually. Yeah.
But we can see them.
Okay. No, I should be doing, slideshow, but it's better this way for me. Yeah. So thanks. So South Africa is one of the world's biggest polluters, actually. Certainly is the biggest polluter in Africa. Burning coal to, at Eskom, Sasol, squeezing petroleum from coal. So it's a real mess, actually. And the story of South Africa is that it is a country which was built on what some left academics called the minerals energy complex. So the minerals energy complex was a situation whereby coal would, the mines would provide coal to Eskom, and then Eskom would burn the coal, produce electricity, and then the mines would in turn use this electricity, to dig out the gold and other minerals. And indeed, the manufacturing sector in South Africa benefited from this minerals energy complex. So it is obvious to everyone now that this carbon heavy, form of industrialization, if you like, is disastrous for the earth. But it's very hard for our economy to shake itself out of this because of vested interest, and also because we see now a greater role for financialization. So, the banks, the big money, its interests are still tied to that form of production, fossil fuels, producing raw materials to be sold overseas, etc. Now, with the entry of financialization, which is the bigger role for finance capital, coincides with the importance of neoliberal capitalism. So at the heart of neoliberal capitalism is privatization, commercialization, commodification, and of course, financialization. What does that mean? It means that because capitalism is hitting a profit crisis, or it hit a profit crisis, I think in the 60s, 70s, the bosses are now trying to make money from everything they can lay their hands on. So under apartheid, electricity was more or less a state concern. So Eskom was owned by the state. The railways were owned by the state. Many things were owned by the state. It was like that in many parts of the world. But with neoliberalism, capital now wants to take over energy production to make money from it, take over education, make money from it, take over water, etc. So this is the situation we face now. At the exact point when we need the state to repurpose our energy sector so that it moves from carbon heavy to carbon neutral, we find big business wanting a piece of the pie. So I don't have time to give examples of all the things I'm saying, but you all know the story about the IPP, independent power producers. So these independent power producers are supposed to be the people who help South Africa move from coal to renewable energy sources, solar energy, water power, etc. But the state, the ANC government is telling us the people who must do this is the private sector. So all the IPPs is the private sector. One of the most important IPP owner is Motsipe, who has set up this company, and he wants to make money from, generating renewables. It's just an example of how neoliberalism facilitates the movement of the intervention, the entry of big capital into many sectors of the economy, including energy. So the three words are privatization, commercialization, financialization. We mustn't forget financialization, because When Motsipe wants when he bids, he wants to win a tender to provide renewable energy, he doesn't use his own money. He goes to the bank, and then the bank, probably Netbank, Netbank, because of its green color, is also trying to exploit that and say, well, the green bank, come to us for green finance. So these capitalists, they go to the bank. Eventually, basically society owes the banks for whatever gets produced, in the hands of the capitalists. Of course, we have another problem in South Africa because in the past, it was basically white monopoly capital. This is an important concept, actually. I know that it has been ridiculed because of its abuse by President Zuma and his friends and his henchmen. But it's important to talk about white monopoly capital, talk about Oppenheimer, and all those people who were exploiting us during apartheid, because they're still around. They're still making money, those big companies, Genco, Anglo-American, whatever. But now they've been joined by the aspirant black bourgeoisie, Motsipe, Ramaphosa. It's not so clear now because Ramaphosa is the president. But, he was the richest man in South Africa for a while. Yeah. He's certainly a billionaire. So now we have white monopoly capital joining hands with the aspirant black bourgeoisie. Of course, the black bourgeoisie, their dream is to take over. But, in reality, they just get some space, in the table controlled by white monopoly capital. So it's important to say this because I saw today, there's a guy called Andre de Ruyter, who used to be CEO of Eskom. You can hear there that part of the struggle between Eskom, the government, and people like de Ruyter is this struggle between the aspirant black bourgeoisie and white monopoly capital. I think, monopoly capital, they want their electricity, their energy. But the black bourgeoisie, they want their cut, from the coal production. So those are some of the dynamics at a political level. Now, in terms of the global standing of South Africa, which is very important, actually, in our struggle to move from carbon heavy to carbon neutral, we find that South Africa finds itself, in a global capitalist system, basically an imperialist-dominated system. Okay? Yeah. Now, whatever South African big capital does, whatever the ANC state does, they have to take into account what's happening internationally. Because on the one hand, they're all doing the same thing, generating profit, raping the earth, exploiting workers. But on the other, because at the heart of capitalism is competition, it's a history of colonialism, there are some contradictions which have to be addressed. So, for example, one of the problems faced by economies like South Africa, we can call them developing economies, is that at some point, the big European markets are going to impose heavy taxes, carbon import barriers. So they'll say, no, we can't buy your goods because you've used a certain percentage of fossil fuel. Remember, it's enlightened self-interest, but there is also a consumer rebellion in the advanced capitalist countries, because the people there, they can see that, the world is burning, and, they are, let's say, they are slightly more richer than us. They've got more space to address these issues and to take positions. And I imagine maybe they have more democracy in some of these countries. But eventually, you'll find that if you produce, cars or goods where you use a lot of dirty energy, you'll be blocked. Barriers will be put, or high custom duties will be put, to discourage you from using fossil fuels. So those are the kinds of contradictions which economies like South Africa face. Now, if you're a boss, you are Anglo-American or even Mutsipe, okay, on the one hand, we have to accommodate the aspirant black bourgeoisie, vested interest, whatever. But on the other, your biggest markets are in Europe. So you're going to be concerned. That is why sometimes it seems as if the bosses are speaking the same language as us. Let's move to carbon neutral. So they are also faced with those realities. Now, having said that, I think it is important to emphasize the urgency of the situation we face. So, we can see there that the earth is doomed to oblivion. People are dying already in Durban. I heard Comrade Patrick Bond the other day. So you are talking about, he calls it the rain bombs which fell on Durban. They are directly climate change related. So his point is that only black people died, which is true actually, Yeah, so, but it's his point to show how, the consequences of racial capitalism, in South Africa means that these disasters will have to be borne by the black working class primarily. Okay, so where is the power to challenge capital and stop it in its tracks? So I'm not going to be long here, but I'll state it as a fact that labor is the only serious challenge that society can produce and pose to the power of capital. And the reason being that labor is able, because of its role as the producers, to block, to stop capital in its tracks. So this is a long story, but it's just like that. So we saw the power of labor during the struggle against apartheid. I'm not saying, race is not important, gender is not important, etc., communities, minorities. But it's a fact that, when those who produce stop producing, then the system is kaput, is finished. So the real power lies there. So, and we saw the power of labor during the struggle against apartheid. Indeed, at the height of the struggle against apartheid, it was capital who went to apartheid bosses, P.W. Porter, de Klerk, and said, hey, let's move away from this system, because they were worried that, the working class was getting too strong. Their system was facing the danger of collapse. So the idea of a just energy transition, as I wind up, Comrade Chair, was born inside the labor movement, both locally and internationally. So the idea of a just energy transition, that when we move from carbon heavy to carbon neutral, the working class must not suffer, must not pay the price, because capital always, shifts the burden to the working class, to the poor, to other classes. So the idea of just energy transition, it's a brilliant idea, actually. Also, especially in South Africa, the idea of socially owned renewable energy systems. So this is so important, given the fact that, as I've mentioned, the IPPs, are now controlled by big capital. The capitalists are now lining up to make money from renewables. And we know their history. One day they'll be producing renewables. On the other hand, they'll still be producing coal, and they'll be checking out which is making more money for them. So Also, as Labour, is pushing for a just energy transition, capital is not sitting back. It is fighting through repression, co-option, appropriation. And remember that capital is not only in South Africa, but is global. Thus, the G20, countries of the G20, advanced imperialist countries, they gave South Africa, the government, $8 billion, for the Just Energy Transition Program. And they understand this as a system of loans, what Ramaphosa calls investments. So they're going to help us move away from fossil fuels, but still locked up, driven by profits. So for them, it's green capitalism. So this is what we have to challenge, good comrades. We need to promote our struggle campaign towards eco-socialism, not green capitalism. We must make the big demands. We must engage in renewable energy projects, campaigns based on our recent experience. For example, 1 million climate jobs campaign, which was spearheaded by the AIDC together with some labor unions, small-scale, community-controlled renewable projects. I believe there are some in Cape Town, various parts of the country. Moreover, we have to address the vaccination and weaknesses and shortcuts in our own ranks. You can see unions like NUMSA, sometimes they seem to be blowing hot and cold, calling for nuclear, agreeing that, no, we need base load. I'm not saying those are not good arguments, but you can hear from the tone that they are shifting from a firm stand position, for just energy transition. So we have to rebuild the working class movement behind the vision of eco-socialism, build on existing campaigns, and make sure that we move away from carbon heavy to carbon neutral and build a better world for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to our next speaker, Sonny Morgan.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Loud and clear. So I don't have such a revolutionary presentation like Comrade Trevor, but I do want to say Comrade Trevor said that he was going to make a presentation but not offer any solutions. So I'm going to take a different tact, right? And I'm going to tell you that we actually do have the solutions. And we do have the solutions because they're plain and they're evident. And I want to focus on two things. Well, I want to focus on community. I was asked to talk about a solution for Eskom. We know that load shedding has become a noose around our neck. It's become a very destructive force, and it is slowly but surely destroying the economy. Not only is it destroying the economy, it's destroying our quality of life. Whether you come from an informal settlement, whether you live in a RDP house, or you live like some of the elites or middle class in decent homes, everybody is affected to some extent. Obviously, the poorer members of our community suffer more than most because they don't have the capabilities to deal with the problem. So load shedding is a problem, but it's not just load shedding, it's the entire energy system. You know that the energy system, the way we have it now, we can call it the minerals energy complex, you want to call it the energy complex, you want to call it the grid, you want to call it the energy business or the energy sector. Let's talk about the grid. The grid is almost 100 years old, the concept of a grid, 100 years old. And do you know that the people who financed the development of the grid 100 years ago, when or a little over 100 years ago, when electricity was being harnessed by the George Westinghouses and the Nikola Teslas of the world, put together the concept of a grid or distributed energy. The same people who funded it 100 years ago, the JP Morgans of the world, still fund it today. In fact, JP Morgan is one of the largest funders of fossil fuels today. So a very traditional, very hierarchical, very narrow focused sector, very difficult to get in, and very centralized and very powerful. Whether it's in the United States, in Australia, in Europe, in India, in South America, the people who control the grid are invariably very powerful, very well connected, and part of the global elites. Um, and yet there is this idea of distributed energy, distributed, decentralized energy. But people think it's very difficult to get into. When you say you're in the energy sector, people automatically think you're part of the elites or the very well connected or very rich. But that's not really the case. Well, it is the case, and it's a system that we have to break down, and we intend to break down. And I'm going to try to concentrate on one type of solution that I think will help to solve the problem. Um, the budget was read yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or yesterday, and there was quite some movement in the desire to move to some renewables. We could have been a market leader in the renewable sector in South Africa. We are not. We are laggard. And we're going to really struggle to become market leaders, to become leaders, thought leaders, technological leaders, execution and implementation leaders, because we have an elite ruling party with well-connected people. Trevor alluded to Motsepe and them, um, and that close cabal that control the energy sector. If anyone's interested, we have a number of rounds of the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program. And out of that program, there were a number of bid windows. We call them rounds. One of the rounds was round 4.5, round 4 and round 4.5. I think we're on round 5 now. I stand to be corrected. I've lost interest in it. And that is basically, if you look at who the main beneficiaries of the last round, going back to round 4, 4.5, and it was Motsepe. In one case, more than 70 or 80% of all the bids approved in that particular round went to him, going right back to the last days of Jeff Radebe's term in office, very quickly and secretively, and very tried to put that teams together in his last days in office. And that cabal, we call them the triad in the industry: Jeff Radebe, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Patrice Motsepe, most beneficiaries. But now we want to concentrate on what we can do. So there's this concept. I've written about it before. I am happy to talk about it at every opportunity. And I'm glad to say that we're probably going to be rolling one of these out very shortly. And I refer to it as the CORE, CORE, for community-owned renewable energy. So I've spoken about what it is, and I'm sure that people might have read the paper. I've presented it extensively in different fora. But what I want to concentrate now is on a real case scenario about what we can do about this. So community-owned renewable energy, or socially owned renewable energy, is a mechanism or a movement or a product, or an idea even, to upend the centralized notion of energy ownership and who controls it. So we have this idea. Well, we don't have this idea. What is becoming apparent is obviously that the grid will never get to some people. And just because you have access to the grid, which what is termed into in the industry, you have an access to the wire. So the cable comes to your door or to your meter. You can still be energy poor, simply because you can't afford the energy that comes out of the wire. So whether it's on prepaid, whether it's via an account, most people, and a growing number of people, are not able to afford electricity. It's a cost. It's going to be eventually a decision between buying food and buying electricity. And we don't stand in judgment of anyone is using social means or to get to demystify the grid, to connect themselves to the grid, because there is this desire that access to the grid should be a basic human right as well. Just like you breathe the air, you must have good running clean water. You must be able to have access to the grid. The government's idea of running the grid, or giving people access to the grid, in the way that they think it is, and this even if you were a recipient of the free electricity, no such a thing as free electricity, but if you got the 50 kilowatts that the government gives you for a month, it's hopelessly um, uh, 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 too small. I consider it a real insult against the poor and against those who are marginalized and the unemployed and the underemployed. And I say it's an insult because to put things in context, we talk about kilowatt hours, but for the ease of the presentation, let's talk about units because they're the same thing, right? Because if you buy prepaid, you buy units. Um, you're actually buying kilowatt hours. So 50 we give to the poor for a month, but you can go to a middle class house, and we're not even talking about the 100 million rand or 50 million or 20 million rand houses. We're talking about somebody who's staying in a good suburb somewhere. They're probably using 50 a day. And so how do you expect somebody to be able to feed their families, make hot water, wash themselves, cook, and have a good sanitation, which is hot water required, and do all of that, and including lighting for safety on 50 kilowatt hours. So one of the things we can do is we can encourage the notion of community owned. So what is community owned? So community owned is where a community gets together and decides to build their own installation. Now there are various iterations of this, right? I can say community owned means that they just have the money, they can organize themselves into a unit, economic unit, into a co-op, into a company, into a non-profit, and they build an energy installation, and they're the owners of that energy installation. That's one of the ways. Others, you can be investors, just invested in it. But community owned, we are talking about decentralizing the ownership of the energy infrastructure. I would like to use the word. We want to democratize the energy sector in South Africa. And one of the ways we can do it is through a socially owned or community owned installation. So let me hone in on what that exactly means and how would it be implemented. So if communities got together and decided that they were tired of the load shedding, or they never got access to the grid, they want to build their own. It's anything from a few solar panels with a hybrid inverter, a generator, and obviously at the moment, to be effective, because you can only provide power from solar during the day or when the sun shines, which is good enough for a lot of people, but you won't be able to provide energy at night if you don't have some form of either storing it in batteries, and if you're not storing it, then you are going to have to make it on demand from another source outside of solar, because we need to be able to do that and provide the energy at night. So at the moment, the preferred route is a diesel generator, but of course we are climate justice activists and working in it, or we are environmentalists, or we just care about the environment and about our communities and the health. So we are good in a perfect solution. We will do away with the fossil fuels, do away with the diesel, and do that via a battery. But initially, you'd be able to do a community-owned renewable energy project centered around, because we are in South Africa, you can throw a solar panel on a roof anywhere in the country. Some places are better than other places, but literally anywhere in the country, a solar panel will be able to produce power. So let me talk about a 20 kilowatt system. Now, what is 20 kilowatt system? It's the capacity size of the system. And because we are producing energy from the sun, we compress the entire sun hours from 7 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But what we come up with is something referred to as a solar factor. So the solar factor in South Africa is in between 5 and 6. Let us just under promise and over deliver and say that it's rather 5. So we say for 5 solid hours, we can produce energy a day from the solar panels. So a 20 kilowatt system will produce 100 kilowatt hours of energy a day. So if we were to say what could we do with that, we could provide energy if it's 100 kilowatt hours a day, and you're going to be giving people 20 units a day, because in my house I'm a middle class person, 2 adults, 4 adults. With all of the benefits. We don't have a swimming pool, but we have all of the other things. We've got every gadget you can think of. So we are able, and because we're energy efficient in our thinking and in our execution, we use on average about 20 units a day. I make of that 20 units a day from my solar system, I make about 15, and I get the other 5 out of some batteries. So if we were to say that we were going to do it in a community, in an informal settlement, they'll probably only need in between 8, maybe 7 a day to 10. If we average it at 10 and good quality lifestyle, somebody in an informal settlement on an RDP house doing 10, then a small microgrid of 20 kilowatts can service the needs of 10 families. So this is how you must consider it. Now remember that we're not only going to be talking about these 10 families. We can make a microgrid to cover an entire community. You could be able to go into, for instance, I'm considering the Slovo Park informal settlement, which is near Crosby, in between Crosby, near the Brixton border, in between Crosby and Coronationville. There's a community, and one of the challenges of doing a microgrid first is to be able to identify and map how many people actually stay there. Even when you ask activists who live in the area, or just community leaders or community people, the figure about how many people live there varies between 8,000 and 25,000, and some numbers as high as 30,000 people. So we don't really know how big it is, but we are considering 100 kilowatt microgrid in that area. Now, if a community stood together and said they wanted to build 100 kilowatt microgrid, now this is something that can be executed in perhaps 30 days. We can build a microgrid somewhere in between 2 weeks to a month, identify a piece of ground, and some security, because solar panels are valuable items and people will steal it. But if you get community buy-in for this project, then we're going to be able to think about where is the socially owned part. So a community will organize themselves into either a co-op, but a co-op only allows 100 members, into a non-profit, or a community, a CBO, community-based organization. We have to iron out how we will execute on that. And then the next big issue is, obviously, if you tell Trevor to go and talk to them, or one day to go and talk to him, Janet will give you some insights about her experiences later. People do want this solution. The solution is there, it can be designed to service the needs of people. The big stumbling block, and today, 5 years ago, when I was talking about this, getting permission and getting compliance, all would have been a stumbling block. That is out of the way now. The Department of Energy, or Cyril, or whoever in their wisdom, have removed some of the constraints. We can build 100 megawatt system without requiring any real permission, and we'll still have to notify, but it's much easier to build even up to 100 megawatt. We're talking about building 100 kilowatt, right? So 100 kilowatt, you wouldn't even need any permission from anyone. So what kills projects like this is the access to finance. These are the key issues. So when we're organizing in communities, we need to be able to talk to the Green Bank, Nedbank, or Standard Bank, the Blue Bank, that's still a fossil fuel. We need to be able to take proposals to them, and we have to put their feet over the fire to demand that there must be funding made available. And we haven't tested this enough in our communities, because we think everything needs to be a arm's length agreement on commercial terms. But we need to be able to use social capital and our social influence and our community influence to be able to go to these banks or to financial intermediaries and get the finance that is available. The stumbling block to put something together like this is finance. But we haven't tapped into the places where we can get the funding that's not exactly finance on a loan basis. For instance, in the Brown Fisherville community, in December last year, we rolled out a number of installations. I'm going to just make the screen bigger, and I might have to see if I can share a screen here on the Zoom thing. I don't know how Zoom works here. I'm going to try to look at a picture and share the picture. They gave a community-based organization 250,000 rand. This was the Trevor Noah Foundation. Gave this community 250,000 rand. In this community, the Trevor Noah Foundation has built at its cost. This is what I'm told. 5 or 6 schools, really, really good quality schools. I visited the schools myself. I've seen the quality of what was built, and so the community already had a relationship with the Trevor Noah Foundation. The Trevor Noah Foundation then gave a local organization 250,000 rand, and we then decided to do some rollout of some energy systems in that area. I was then, as an activist and a solar business owner, and brought on board to provide the solution. We were able to provide a solar home kit to 50 households. 50 households. A solar panel and a unit to provide 2 LED lights and the ability to charge phones. Now, it obviously is a small solution and only benefiting 50 households, but I can tell you every single story we heard from every single recipient of this is what a difference it made. Mind you, these were for communities who are already connected to the grid, but couldn't afford the energy coming out of the wire. So they couldn't afford to buy units. And they were also victims of load shedding at erratic hours. So through the school initiative, because these were also the households were targeted by a workshop that said the parents showed the most interest in the child's education and came to all the meetings, and the child also excelled at school. So to give that child the benefit of the doubt, this initiative was rolled out in that school. So there is a desire for it. So sometimes we can look at other avenues for finance through philanthropic organizations, which we haven't considered in the past. Now, if you were going to talk about a microgrid in a community of 20 kilowatt, you're going to look for R1 million. But you could also be looking for 10 million rand. I am not a fan of what some other people are, where they say you must build in such a way that you can feed back power to the grid. That's not our objective, to help Eskom to produce clean energy. We need to be talking about less about the selling of electricity and more about the servicing of electricity. And what is, thank you, Awande, what is the servicing of electricity? That is providing electricity so people can get access to services, providing electricity so people can get access to the work that electricity can do. So it can provide safety, it can provide access to education, it can provide access to your lifestyle, so you can cook and you can wash. And in most cases, when you give people access to electricity, they start to be able to get an entrepreneurial streak. And what do they do in that entrepreneurial streak? They buy a sewing machine so they can make small little items at home, or they buy a clipper, electrical clipper, so they can cut people's hair. So it is an enabler of entrepreneurship and income. So I'm saying, when we think about microgrids, and I'm wrapping up, we don't have to think about it so that we design it in such a way that people can sell electricity back to the grid. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. It's not our focus. And then if you do make that the incentive that people can buy to the grid, they'll sell more of the electricity instead of giving the electricity to the people who need it most. So my idea is that we can deal with this issue around the massive rollout of microgrids and encourage people and communities to organize themselves to own these microgrids, and then to talk to people like myself that is an activist that will go to communities and talk to them and show them how this can be done. I'm wrapping up. I'm done, but I would like the opportunity to show some pictures later on, just to give people an idea of what it looks like and what's happening around us, because this thing is happening whether we like it or not. People will organize themselves and take care of themselves if we encourage them and we show them what the solutions are. Happy to answer questions when we get to that time.
Thank you, Sunny. And next we have Professor Janet Cherry.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited about this seminar. Sunny, I wish you weren't so negative about the model of feeding into the grid, but I'm going to pose an alternative form of socially owned renewable energy. We also call it core, community-owned renewable energy. But the key difference is that it's not a microgrid. It's based on selling electricity to the grid. So let me share my screen and let me know if you can see it. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So this was the project in KwaZulu, the community-owned renewable energy project, which falls under the Transition Township as a pilot project. Sunny actually knows about it because he was at one of the first workshops where we discussed this. I think it was about 5 years ago. We have really struggled with this. We are optimistic because we think that the environment is changing in the political sense, that it's now becoming possible to do this. But I've got to say that there are still problems. You can see the positive, I mean, the positiveness in this article in the Herald newspaper, which was in 2021, I think. SA energy landscape can be transformed by people power. KwaZulu project could be a blueprint for countrywide rollout in a win-win for all, etc. This is a, oh God, no, why am I can't see the, I can't go to the next slide.
That's your arrow is. It changed the slide, by the way.
It did change the slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So that shows you our little installation. It's on a carport at the moment in a gap tap, which is a public open space. It's a municipal space surrounded by 36 households. They are in an old formal township, so they do have electricity connections. There is a little electricity substation and transformer on that gap tap. And the gap tap is essentially a commons, which we're seeing as a public space which the residents should control. We haven't come into problems putting things on the gap tap and getting support for this from the municipality. Where we've come into problems is the establishment of a municipal account so we can get a smart meter and sell the electricity. And we can only get a municipal account if we've got a lease agreement, or if you own it, like if you're a homeowner, you can get a municipal account. But Saltuba, which is the cooperative, which has been set up as a neighborhood cooperative, i.e. the criteria for membership are the households around that gap tap who manage the space. They are eligible to each for one share, equal share in that cooperative. And the idea is that they will own that production facility. So it has been paid for by research funding and donations from private trusts, which as part of a research project as a pilot. But we actually got support from the municipality here for 4.5 million rand to expand this to 2 other gap taps. We worked out it cost about 1.5 million to set up each of these installations. This is this initial one is only a 12 kilowatt installation, but it should be if the whole gap tap was covered with solar panels, it could be 50. But I'll show you some figures, some statistics. Here's another one. We've actually combined it in this case with food gardening, water capture, and a waste recycling facility on this particular gap tap. But our objective actually is to sell the power to the grid. Just to show you, this is where KwaZulu is, for those of you not familiar with the township. It's an old township, about 25,000 households. And yeah, it's basically got services. So we're not talking the informal settlement microgrid model that Sunny was talking about. And this is really, really what we're saying, that this household cooperative model could produce, in terms of vegetables, waste recycling, and energy production, a substantial potential revenue. I won't go into the sort of model of it, but what's really concerning us at the moment, in terms of, I'm just going to focus on the solar PV aspect of it, is the institutional model. So our understanding, and this was from the Municipal Electricity Department, which was about 6 years ago, was actually very keen on this project. And the idea was that there would be a feed-in tariff, and the feed-in tariff would enable this cooperative to feed directly to the municipal grid and sell the electricity to the municipality. Then they said, because this was not possible at that time in terms of the regulations, and it may actually be possible now, I'll come back to that. They said what we should do is use a wheeling tariff. Now, wheeling tariff means that you use the municipal grid to wheel the electricity that you produce, and then you sell it to a third party. And the third party pays the wheeling fee. So they pay the municipality for the use of the grid. The producer doesn't pay, the buyer of that electricity pays. They pay the municipality a fee, and then they pay the Saltuba. The cooperative is called Saltuba because it's called between Sali and Tubali Street. So Saltuba Cooperative, in this case, they would pay for the electricity. Now, we were thinking that, contrary to what Sunny is saying, that we don't want to support Eskom and give electricity to Eskom, that we would undercut Eskom, i.e. we would sell electricity to Eskom at a lower price than, we would sell electricity to the municipality at a lower price than the Eskom electricity that they buy. This was our thinking around this. So this was then the challenge, was to put this in place. The structure, this installation that you saw in the first slide, was set up in end of 2019, before COVID, and produced around, in the first 18 months, around 20,000 rands worth of electricity. But the cooperative was not able to get paid for that, because the municipality simply did not know how to do this, like how they could. So we had, interestingly enough, we had the support of the electricity department, which actually connected the solar installation to the grid. And we had a meter, an old meter, like that you can see the meter, you can see how much electricity is being produced, and how, where the meter's running forward or backward, like whether you're using the electricity or you're feeding it into the grid. So the members of the co-op and we as the university and the technicians and so on could actually see how much electricity was being produced. And we worked out at the rate that one pays for it, that it was worth around 20,000 Rand. We then ended up in the middle of COVID with some of the solar panels being stolen, and we still didn't have an agreement with the municipality. And we had a sort of strategic seminar with different role players, and we agreed that until we got this sorted out, we should actually take the solar panels down. And then last year we had a rethink, and we said, okay, now it's possible. The municipality then came and said, okay, this was now a year later, they said, no, now the legislation is changed. We can now buy the electricity from you. We're sure that this is going to work. Very positive about it. So we put the panels back up, and we said, well, until we get the account in place, we're going to put in a local, what we could call it, a sort of mini business opportunity or a community opportunity in the context of massive load shedding. So we put in a lithium-ion battery and an inverter and some lights in that structure, in fact, in a new structure which was built. So it's not just that little carport that you saw, but there's a new structure, but I didn't bring a picture of the new structure. But anyway, the new structure is for waste recycling and a community kitchen, and we thought it could serve as a basis for running some community benefits. So students could study there, they could access the internet, we could put in a modem router, and with the lithium-ion battery, they could actually charge devices and access the internet and so on. So we had a launch of that little aspect of the project in December, just before Christmas. And then on Christmas Day, the lithium-ion battery was stolen and the digital scale for the waste recycling was stolen. So we went back to the municipality. We said, how are we going to get this going? We had some discussions with NERSA, and we had some input saying, it's not that easy to be paid by the municipality, because there is a public procurement process, and the Municipal Finance Management Act does not actually allow the municipality to buy electricity without it going through a competitive process. So then we heard, if you heard about a month ago, Cape Town got an exemption from Treasury so that they could buy electricity from private power producers and businesses. This is very significant. So this is a game changer. So then we say, well, hang on. If they can do it in Cape Town, why can't we do it here? Can we get an exemption from Treasury? This is a community program, sell electricity to the municipality. So there's actually something of a debate going on about this, because, either they give exemptions across the board to municipalities to allow them to do this, or it requires, well, if they do that, it's a bit odd, because it does allow for lots of room for tenderpreneurship and competition and corruption in the process of procuring electricity. But I'm just a bit concerned that it's actually against the current legislation and constitution to do that. However, municipalities seem to think that it might be possible. In the meantime, they say that we can wheel the electricity and sell it to a third party using the municipal grid. So let's assume that we can actually do this. And I don't know if it's possible, but this is a sort of financial model of what is possible. So we're looking at a 1.5 million rand investment for a whole gap tap, okay? And that will generate around 600,000 rand per annum. And we're assuming that some of that will be used to maintain and reinvest and so on, and that then the surplus or the profit will be available to distribute to the households that are members of that cooperative. So we think, if you look at the average household income, which is low, it's a working class township, that it has the potential to raise average household income by almost 2/3. And the important thing is that this is actually an ownership model. So the residents who are members of that co-op actually own it. It's not a job creation scheme. And the thinking behind it, if you want a sort of radical model here, it's that renewable energy in the form of PV solar allows, as Sunny explained, distributed energy production. So there is something between, and I have a problem convincing the COSATU and SAFTU labor movement about this, because, and the Communist Party as well, I have great trouble convincing them that a centralized state-owned facility is the only option, because they can't see anything in between privatization of electricity and Eskom. However, there is actually a model which we are arguing allows for, the technology allows for distributed energy production. And if you have a model of social ownership, i.e. they are the owners of the means of production, which is possible in this case, then you're actually changing the social relations of production for the society. So the working class actually become owners of the means of production. So Trevor, I don't know what you think of this. I mean, I'm really interested to engage with people about this model of social ownership and whether you think it's viable and how it will challenge things. We like linking it to other forms of production and so on, but I won't go into that now. But just in terms of the current energy crisis, this is what our researcher, Patrick Brennan, who many of you know, what he worked out here. So he said this is in South Africa here. So he's got statistics for our cooperative, and then Ward 22, which is where it's based, for KwaZulu as a whole, which has 25,000 households, Nelson Mandela Bay, which has 360,000 households, and the South Africa, which has 16 million households. So he says if all 16 million households in South Africa participated in this household, if you did this on a household basis, and his argument is that it doesn't actually matter whether it's on the roof of a household or on an installation which is owned by the households, but the installed capacity could provide more, i.e. 124% of the current installed capacity. And that would be more than 80% of what is needed by 2030 from renewable energy. Okay, so this is not a perfect model. It's just an indication of the potential for PV solar. So let me stop there, and you can interrogate this model and discuss it and so on.
Well, thank you to all three of our speakers. I think this was a very comprehensive conversation around what the alternatives are to our current crisis, the different ways in which we can approach this, but still keeping a democratic, emancipatory, and redistributive approach to how we deal with the energy crisis, which I think is sharply contrasts the way in which it's spoken about in the mainstream media and the way in which I think most people are thinking around it with regards to President's approach of Ministry for Electricity and car power ships and things like that. So I think this is a great reminder that the scale, of with regards to what the options are genuinely wide, and that there is a just alternative to the way in which we deal with it. But I think also a great thing about this conversation is that there's also some diversity and contrast in some of the proposals put forward by the speakers. And I think that makes it a more interesting conversation. And hopefully with some of the questions that we might get can kind of iron out some of those differences, but also some of the convergences between where this is field with regards to some of these inputs. So I think the first question I want to pose, but I think to each speaker, I want to pose this question to all three speakers, but I think I'm going to pose it differently to each of you, beginning with Trevor. Wrapping up from what Sunny and Janet have brought forward, I think Trevor began with a kind of great perspective that linked our local crisis to what's happening globally, also putting in context the nature of what electricity and energy approach has been historically and currently. And I think that kind of meshed in well with also how Sunny began with regards to the differences and the similarities between how these grids were designed and how these systems were essentially designed and where we are now. And I want to pose this first question to Trevor. And I think actually I'll pose these questions individually to each speaker, but to Trevor first, taking into account how you ended off with regards to reminding us that the concept of a just energy transition or just transition began with labor, and also bringing forward the centrality and importance of how labor can help us move towards these alternatives. I'm just curious with regards to what your perspective is concerning some of the proposals put forward by both Sunny and Janet, particularly with regards to Janet's final question, which was also pointed at you with regards to your thoughts around some of these proposals that they both put forward with regards to social ownership and community ownership of renewable energy, in contrast to the main way in which we've been thinking about transitioning Eskom, the central entity of Eskom, to renewables. But what are your thoughts with regards to social and community ownership? And also, what role do you think labor can have in actually pushing some of these ideas forward also?
Okay, thank you. And also thank you for interesting inputs by Comrade Sani and Janet. Yeah, so the long and short, especially the specific debate between Sani and Janet about, I can't remember what you used to call them, but I'm sure Janet and Sani know, but the two-way meters, where you can feed back and get money. So that position is our position from a long time ago when the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee was still strong, because our vision was, and it's surprising, we used to engage with Eskom, because, when you're strong, then they have no choice but to engage with you. So our vision was put solar panels on every rooftop in Soweto, okay? Yeah. And then have this two-way, I don't know, retro something, meter, yeah. And then, but remember, we used to connect people, who had their electricity cut off from a working class socialist perspective. So for us, the question of profit never came in, okay? So we didn't think that feeding it back to Eskom is making profit, but maybe it would make it more affordable. Maybe it would help the country, society move quicker to renewable. So it's a question of, it's not what you do, but how you do it. Can you see? What's the vision? Yeah, because sometimes, as Marx would say, quantity changes into quality, so you can do something and then there's this break point now when you are doing the opposite of what you wanted. So I understand where Sani is coming from, because I think he's thinking, given the dog eat dog, poverty, inequality, desperation, so people might misunderstand it. That's why such a thing, okay, we have no choice now, we are weak, but it needs a movement, a strong movement moving forward. Then it's clearer what is going on. Because, of course, if there is no movement, if it's weak, it can easily be turned upside down. So I have no problem with two-way, and I think that's the way to go. Also, I have no problem with decentralization. I think it's the way to go. It doesn't mean that if you decentralize, then you have to close shop for Eskom. No, you just have a different Eskom. Yeah, and it could be that one area has got benefits or advantages over another. How can we equalize and share the risk and balances, So that's my position. Thank you.
I just want to remind everyone also, all the attendees, you can post your questions in the chat. If you have any questions for the speakers also, and we can read those out and post some of those questions to them. So I'm going to give my next question then to Sunny. I think I just enjoy the way in which the conversation has gone, because it began with Trevor giving context, but also saying he's not going to give solutions. And I think that we've already come to solutions, but not just solutions in general, but we're coming to democratic and just solutions. We're talking about democracy, we're talking about decentralization, we're talking about giving access to those who don't have access. And I think when you were speaking about energy poverty, it makes a good distinction between how it's spoken about in the mainstream about, post-apartheid, so many people have been given access to energy. We're talking about, power lines and people being plugged into the grid, but do people even have access? Like what Trevor was saying now in terms of how, you know, in places like Soweto, and I think Soweto always comes to mind because it's always the one that's spoken about, where people are easily cut off, and even if the lines are plugged in, there's no access there. So I think the distinction that you made between servicing of electricity and giving back to the grid is a necessary and important point in this conversation, because we're talking about people's ability to live and to live with dignity, but to also live to their fullest. And in the modern day, in the contemporary era, in 2023, that means having electricity, not just for business, but to live with a certain quality of life, as you clearly made you made apparent when you started talking about, you know, the differences between people in our society, but just how quality of life is being affected across the board. So I just want to give you more space then to also articulate what your perspective is between this servicing of electricity versus feeding back into the grid, with regards to your perspective around it, with regards to, how you may differ or disagree with what Trevor and Janet was saying, and what, you know, why you emphasize that importance of servicing of electricity, because you did touch on it a bit with regards to some of the entrepreneurial spirit. So there are economic effects and positives that we can see from it, but we also get the sense that that's obviously not the main focus as to why you're putting that forward. Sorry.
Thanks, Awandi. Great question. Yeah, so I'm a fan of all of the benefits of a democratized energy system. So all of the benefits. But our situation in South Africa at the moment, and for it's going to be like this for a long time, right, is the fact that we need to get people energized. I read a report some years ago. I always use it as an example. I think it was from the Free State University. A master's student dealt with this issue of fires in informal settlements, right? And in her research, people said, well, you must use fire retardant material, you must space out the informal settlement better, you must make sure you have fire stations. And her conclusion, I wish I made an effort to find her. Her conclusion was actually, you just need to electrify the informal settlement, because the fires are caused by candles and lighter fuel and buying petrol and storing diesel and paraffin. She came to this conclusion that you have to electrify. So we must spend our effort, and there are situations and there are projects where people will want to sell electricity back to the grid, and I'm in support of that if they can make the economics work. I don't think the economics can work. I think more so it is the issue of making sure people have access to electricity. Our people are dying from shack fires. People are suffering from asthma, from burning bowlers, all of that. We must electrify, and we must do that because we have the ability. South Africa is the third best place, I think the best, but people will tell you the third best place to develop renewable energy sources, because we have a wind resource and we have a solar resource. So you throw a panel down anyway, it will make electricity, right? So if that's the truth, and I know it to be the truth, then we must be encouraging that rollout. And I think that the idea, for me, the focus is to alleviate poverty and give opportunity, right? We can do that. A poor person spends disproportionately more on simple fuel like buying paraffin and candles than a rich household. The rich household is about 3 to 4% of their monthly thing go to energy sources. It's 25 to 30% for poor people. So I'll give you the example of a packet of candles that cost around 36 rand, 35 rand, to make the maths easier, right? So 2 packets of candles for a month, 70 bucks. We can build a system or show a community how to build a system that will give them lighting, because candle is only for lighting, right? They'll spend under 1,000 rand and get a complete system for lighting, a 10-watt solar panel, a battery that goes in your alarm system or your gate motor, and 2 LED lights They never have to buy candles again in their lives. For 1,000 Rand, less than 1,000 Rand, we can teach people how to do that. So when I talk about community-owned renewable energy, I talk about all the benefits. So the benefits, there's a space for what Trevor is saying, so that people get energy, they get democratized. We talk about worker power. Who's going to build these microgrids? Who's going to put all the solar panels that Janet wants to put on all the houses? Who's going to do it? We're going to teach people in communities to do it. So that's one of the issues. So it comes with a whole myriad of benefits. I have seen lives changed by people who have access to energy. That's not going to kill them. It's not going to burn their shack down. So I want to focus on that. I want to leave you with this, Awande. So we talk about selling power back to Eskom, right? Even if they paid you R1, right? Your input cost is much higher than that. You won't pay off your system. We talk about middle class South Africa now, right? Having to feed back their excess energy. The word for the meter that Trevor was looking is bidirectional. We're looking for bidirectional. But in order to sell power back to the grid, you're going to need a meter that have 4 quadrants, right? As the city of Joburg can't give you an accurate bill for a meter that only goes in one direction. How are they going to give you an accurate bill for a meter that works in 4 different directions? But besides that, my calculations prove or indicate that if a person spends, because you have to buy your own meter, by the way, right? In the city of Joburg, it's 10,000 Rand. In the city of Cape Town, it's 10,000. In the city of Joburg, it's 13,000 Rand. If you ask them to put this 4-quadrant meter in. Only selling excess energy, so the piece that you don't need, right? You never even recover the cost of the meter over the lifespan of the plant. You won't even recover the cost of the meter, let alone make money out of it. So my focus is not to do that. My focus is to provide energy that people can live on. That is going to be for me a key thing. And our people they have zero electricity, right? And they won't be able to afford to buy a system that is decent enough for them to have access to electricity they can feed back to the grid. But for the people who can do it, that's fine. There's a model there. I question the economics of doing it. And I'm going to close with this last point. Solar is the cheapest electricity on the planet. To attract investors, you're going to have to come in cheaper than what it is now. Do you know how much it is for the audience and for you, Awande? The cheapest recorded energy at the moment in the system that is on the IPP model is 1.5 US cents. That's 21 cents of energy. So you can build a power plant today on solar and you can sell electricity and the bid price is less than 21 cents. In round 5 or round 6, we're already at the 45 cents in South Africa. So you have to build the projects at so much scale to be able to sell electricity to earn. You won't recover your capital costs in my calculations. I'd like to see Janet's calculations. I'll take the conversation offline so we can look at those numbers, but I'm not convinced by the numbers.
Thank you, Sunny. I think, to begin, obviously, following what Trevor said and also your input now to this line of inquiry is that, first and foremost, I think it just has to be made distinctively clear. We talk about renewables, but where we're from, this part of the world, solar, particularly as a form of renewable energy, is not only very much affordable, as you were saying right now, also, but it's also very distinct in terms of its potential and capacity to be democratically generated and used also due to where it is. So I think also the points that you were putting forward with regards to energy usage, energy servicing, some of the other wider effects that we see from electrification of communities that are suffering from things such as the fires. Sometimes these things go over people's heads, like you were saying. Someone would approach this problem saying, oh, we need fire retardant materials and things like that, where the solution can be something as straightforward as, electrification. And I think now this is where I want to give Janet your chance to respond to what both Trevor and Sunny were saying, particularly with some of the points that Sunny put forward with regards to why the emphasis on providing and making up that gap for people's ability to access, and also some of the difficulties that Sunny was bringing forward with regards to the ability to sell back also, and how that may also diminish the focus on providing for people that ability to have access to electricity. But I also just want to add to this also in terms of the point you're making with regards to the city of Cape Town's ability to buy electricity, and what the changes that will have in terms of how municipalities and cities across the country and also national government's going to approach this issue. I have a sense, obviously through your presentation, but also in a greater sense, that you see this also as an opportunity for complete transformation. So I just want to give you that opportunity to respond to Sunny whilst expanding on that potential that you see from some of these changes.
Yeah, no, thanks. Look, on the economics of it, I've got Patrick Brennan on the call, and he can maybe respond a little bit to Sunny if we have time. But I wanted to just raise, so the question about access. So we're talking in KwaZulu about a big township where people have access to electricity, okay? So is it affordable? Well, they get free basic electricity. It's not enough. They need to buy additional electricity, etc. The objective of this project is not to provide them with free electricity or cheap electricity. The idea is that they are still eligible for their free basic electricity. It does not take away their right to get that free allocation. And they are on the grid already. So the installation is selling to the grid. It's not replacing what they are consuming. In terms of the financing, I mean, the big problem, of course, if you want to do this at scale, and it needs to be done at scale in order to be viable, as Sunny says. So we imagine a sort of network of cooperatives across the whole township. Then it could be viable. But of course, where's the capital going to come from? We don't know at this stage. I mean, we had support from the municipality to expand the pilot to 2 other places, but that didn't come through because our municipality is in a bit of administrative chaos. And then we started thinking about this issue of the JET-P financing. And I think there's a question in the chat about JET-P IP. Now, the climate justice charter movement and so on have been completely opposed to the JET-P IP and to the President's Climate Commission and what they're trying to do. But I think we should try and explore that as an opportunity to implement some alternatives. I know there is not a huge amount in that huge JET-P IP fund for community-owned or socially owned renewables. I mean, it's like 4% or something, but that 4% is still considerable. And we're basically going to try and argue that there should be some emphasis on this. It may not be from the JET-P financing, but from other financing, which is leveraged through national government in some way. We don't know how exactly, but I mean, that is a problem. I mean, Sunny put forward the idea that we should go to banks and get loans from banks and concessional loans, etc. I mean, this is the same thing. It's just like trying to do it through government, which has got bigger access to concessional loans. Anyway, so let me finish there. I don't want to go on too long about this.
So I am conscious of time, but I do want to take this question because Janet touched on it. And I also want to give it to Trevor and Sunny to answer by Thandile Zigalala about what the panelists feel can be done to challenge the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan as it stands. So this Thandile goes on to say, this sort of developmental model seems very contingent on and reinforces dependency on the capital of imperial powers, which threatens our nation's ability to self-determine our future developments. It is future generations will carry the weight of the concessional loans. What do we do about this? So I just want to pass it on to Trevor, and then Sunny, would you like to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll pass it to Sunny first and then to Trevor to wrap it up, because I think Janet's already started us along this path with regards to approaching it. Sunny, you may go.
Thank you. So Ngwane asked me earlier on before the call to give a bio, and I said, well, you can just say that I'm a climate justice activist. But now I'm going to add to my bio a little bit. I am the co-global founder of the Debt for Climate movement. This weekend, I will be talking in Bern in Switzerland, in Berlin at the Finance Ministry, and in London from this weekend to next weekend. And I'm going to be talking about debt cancellation. And why I bring this up now, because this idea of the funding, we know now that the 8 billion or 133 billion rand, only 4% of it is grant or concessional funding. The rest of them are just normal commercial loans. And we don't know, because of the opaque nature of the negotiations, what the terms and conditions of that is. So I want to give that background, that I'm opposed to the government, South Africa, taking on any more loans at all, because the loans come from the World Bank, the IMF, people like BlackRock and other investment funds. It's going to be the same. It's going to play out like this across the world, where there is going to be just energy transitions. In Indonesia at the moment, they've also signed a JET investment plan, and in Vietnam they are under negotiation with these kind of plans. So I'm opposed to the government, the state, burdening future generations with more debt. We actually should be talking about debt cancellation, not taking on more debt. So what really has to happen about what is wrong, and CJCM, of which I'm, as you know, Ngwane, we're a great supporter of the work that you guys do, very, very in support of this critique that you guys put out of the plan, because it's not really a plan. We already know, the writer said in his interview yesterday that they're already talking about how they can loot in that plan. The plan is not fit for purpose. It was originally worse than it was now. Originally, it was planned to put most of that into the hydrogen economy and the electric cars. It's only through activism and through the critique and through civil society influence that it's going to go where actually it's needed the most. But Janet has a point. We haven't done enough work to ask and demand that some of that money be set aside for renewable energy projects in communities on the socially owned model. We haven't done that work, and we should. So the question is, I support the fact that we mustn't burden future generations, and I'm afraid, unfortunately, and Janet is right, I am a bit more pessimistic than I was a few years ago, because now we have a bit more evidence, and the evidence is that the global elites, the well-connected, the Ramaphosas and the triads of the South African energy landscape are winning at the moment. So we need to really, really encourage the growth of not only socially owned, but there's a step before that. We need to organize and mobilize to democratize the grid. And it must be looked at not as a rent-seeking opportunity, but as the grid is a social good like water is, and we need to protect it. And we need to encourage the ownership of it from that point of view, ideological ownership, mental ownership, before we actually get physical ownership. To say that the grid should not be privatized, the grid should not be owned by the global elites and by the well-connected, but it must be democratized in every sense of the word.
Thank you. And we'll just end off Trevor's input with regards to this question. Sorry, Trevor, you're still on mute.
Okay, I had already written my answer, but when Sunny started speaking, I didn't press send, but I sent it. Yeah, I agree with Sunny. So this whole JETIP thing, it requires vigorous opposition, for the reasons he has put, reparations, unjust, the business opportunity, and it perpetuates and reproduces, north-south dependence, unequal power relations. So, and I think I did make the point, because sometimes, on the left, there's this confusion about labor. But, half the time it's because of what union leaders are doing, falling over themselves, getting co-opted, running unions like their own personal fiefdoms. But we do need labor, it's power. So we need that red and green, alliance. And I think the energy crisis in South Africa and in other countries, okay, it presents a danger and an opportunity. A danger because, the right-wingers will say, yeah, we need electricity, whether it's coal or whatever. We need nuclear. But it's an opportunity because, the masses are focused on this problem and they can't see a solution. So if you can come and challenge, systematically, to the extent that I can say that we were a small group, the United Front, we're having our strategic meeting this weekend. And we do want to put as a major campaign for our energy campaign, this thing of the JETIP, because we think it allows linking international and local issues. But I think that the pioneer here clearly is Sunny. So I fully agree with him.
So I think before I give my final comments to wrap this up, I just want to point out to Prof. Devin Pillai's question in the chat with regards to, I don't know if comrades from AIDC are here, but they're also pushing centralized status options with unions. Any comments? So unfortunately, we are out of time, but we did have Dominic Brown from AIDC in our previous webinar, but maybe in light of the conversation we've had today, we should also have someone else come and take into consideration these points that have been brought forward by today's panelists to keep this conversation moving forward. Also, just to point to Trevor's input there in the chat also, that yes, it reinforces capital dependency, reproduces unequal power relations, and avoids the question of reparations. JET IP must be opposed, especially because the G7 is using it as a model for other North-South assistance, just energy transition projects, as Sunny was also speaking about with regards to countries like Vietnam. And it is unjust, unlikely to achieve its goals, has funding shortfalls, and is a business opportunity for Northern investors. So I think what we can come out from this conversation with regards to is, I think the way in which we ended it, or ending it, is also touching back to the way in which it started, with the context that Trevor put forward with regards to the context of the power split, with regards to how energy is managed in this country, but also in global North and global South. And I think the inputs given by Sunny and Janet, where they overlap, but also where they diverge, still also give us a fundamental difference with regards to the alternatives to how we're managing the power crisis, how the power crisis can be managed, away from where I think we're currently stuck right now as a country, and thinking about it with regards to more non-renewables, more fossil fuels like coal. We're talking about perpetuating or keeping the current system moving, or keeping it alive, limping, just to provide us with power. And I think that the fundamental shift required, brought through by all the panelists, beginning with Trevor's provocation with regards to the ongoing power disequilibrium and the inputs of democratization and the models that Janet and Sunny put forward, is that to get what we want, we need to push for the alternatives that exist in the now. There is no future time for us to say, let's keep pumping more coal, let's build these nuclear power stations right now, and then someday we'll touch on the solar, the wind, and other renewable options and democratized options that are available to us. We have to factor those in now. And I think that each speaker also brought forward considerable challenges with regards to the limitations. As Trevor was saying, we need to bring labor into it, touching on what Janet was saying with some of the difficulties that they face with regards to having labor and other progressive formations like that buying into and understanding the potential for socially owned and cooperative models of decentralized ownership of energy, but also what Sunny brought forth with regards to the problem of capital, because these projects do need to be financed, and we need to think around ways in which that can happen without being beholden to debt and some of these global institutions which are pushing their own agenda. So I'd like to thank all three panelists for taking their time out today to give us such an informative and provocative conversation. I hope that everyone in attendance, you've taken something from this to move forward with, because I know everyone is having these conversations around Eskom and the power crisis, but I think it's these kind of inputs and this kind of conversation which we've had today is the kind of solutions and the kind of provocation we need to permeate throughout the rest of society and the way in which we're thinking about this problem. I think there's a lot of negativity, there's a lot of pessimism around where we are right now. But I think that the more we focus on these solutions, the more we focus on these questions, as Trevor began with regards to asking the right questions so we can provide the right answers, the more we move ourselves closer towards attaining that just future that we require. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Please enjoy the rest of your day. I know everyone's probably got load shedding coming or going, but thank you to our speakers once again.
Thank you, comrades.
Thank you. I don't want to really be negative. So I want to leave it in a positive way, right? Solar is the cheapest on the planet. I'm encouraged by all the work that all of you are doing. There's great minds in the IT business where there are lots of eyeballs on the problem, and we're going to solve this thing, right? We just all have something to do, and we need to multiply our impacts 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 fold. We still don't.
Yeah, there's actually nothing else to do. We just have to.
Absolutely, Janet. Nothing else to do. Yeah. Viva, comrades, viva.
Viva.
Yeah, we were protesting at Standard Bank yesterday for the funding of the ECOP. We're all doing something, and I know that we're going to solve this thing. The elites cannot win the struggle. It's when the workers get behind the issue, and we take cognizance of the fact that we must respect the poor. My biggest problem with the ANC and is how they disrespect the poor. It calls me. I tell you, I can get angry, and even worse than that. So, comrades, viva!
Thanks, Annie.
I love being in your company. I love being in your company, all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Annie.
All right. Trevor, how's your system working? He's gone.
Bye-bye.
He doesn't worry about load shedding because I put a nice system in for him.
No, I've also got a system.
Okay, so do I.
Universities had to have it, for COVID and lockdown. So we just had to. We had to teach online for 2 years on, using batteries.